Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, excuse me. Welcome to the session, How to Get Credit for Your Research Data, in the frame of ConReceipt Virtual Week. I am Carlos Estevez from Elsevier, and first of all, I would like to thank on behalf of Elsevier to the National Consortium on Scientific and Technological Information for inviting us to partner with them at this important event for scientific community in Mexico. Elsevier, as leader in information and analytics for customers across the global research and health ecosystems, welcome you to this 1-hour session. Important to mention that we'll have some minutes at the end of the session for questions and answers, so please feel free to send your question at any time during the presentation. And now, it's an honor for me to present Wouter Haak. Wouter is a musician with a master's degree in computer science and an MBA, an entrepreneur in beginning of his career. He worked at eBay, Excellent, and for the last 5 years, he has been Vice President of Research Data Management at Elsevier. Prior to that, he was responsible for Elsevier's product strategy for Scopus, Science Direct, and Mendeley, roles that share a central focus on delivering tools that improve research results. In the area of data and use and reuse are increasingly the use and reuse are increasingly important. So now we have Wouter. Thanks, Wouter, to be with us.
Thank you, Carlos. And again, welcome everybody. Thank you to spend this time with me. As you can hear from my accent, I'm unfortunately not a Spanish speaker, and neither I am an English speaker. My native language is Dutch, so I think you'll have to bear with me and my accent. Carlos already did the introduction. I am interested in data, research data. The data that we all know is at the heart of doing research, at the heart of scientific discovery and making the world of research better. So to start off, I think I would like to maybe answer a question that you may have. You may know Elsevier as a publisher. Yes, we publish lots and lots of articles together with you around the world of research. But we care more than only about articles. We care actually about open science. And the reason for that is that we believe that the future of science, that is actually already happening today, is about the network of interlinked information. Data connects to articles, connects to tools, connects to users. We see open science as a way for you to make faster progress in this ecosystem. And we'd like to play part in this ecosystem, and we are playing part in this ecosystem, not only as a publisher, but also as a data provider, as a data consumer. We optimize data, we measure, and we enrich. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about your data, because you're part of that ecosystem, and your data helps to enrich and enhance that. So how does that work? So when I talk about research data, I talk about the full scope of data. I mean raw data, any measurement, process data. It can be protocols, methods. It can be computer programs. It can be scripts or algorithms, or it can be the metadata, the machine and environment settings. Together, this need is all research data, and together we want to make this data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. FAIR. Why? Well, because if the data is reused, if the data is actually reused by others in this ecosystem, in this network, then actually we save time, research gets better, and you save time. So there's a big question about data sharing, whether this is kind of a stick or a carrot approach. So what you see is that funding bodies, NIH, NSF, Wellcome Trust, and many national funding bodies are starting to mandate that researchers have to share their research data. So I'm showing you a graph in the middle from the UK, where you see the number of institutions that have adopted a data sharing policy. And you really see that over the past 10 years, this has taken a very fast increase. And right now, there's basically no UK institution, actually no European institution, and I would venture no US institution either, that doesn't have their own data sharing policy. I'm sure that in Mexico, this is the same case. Many institutions start to care about their data. But it's not only funder or institutional driven. Actually, when we ask researchers, how do you look at data, and how often do you share data, and how much do you value an article or a data citation, you actually see a clear shift. You see more and more researchers themselves start to care about data. And then obviously, well, why? It's because of the computational increase. It's because domains in science are starting to merge, and adjacent domains and data from adjacent domains need to be combined to get to the next breakthrough. So obviously this is a trend. You can see this by the increase in data sharing by datasite registrations. So datasite tracks data sets in many repositories worldwide. And again, you can see that over the last 10 years, there's a massive increase in the number of data sets that are registered every year by datasite. So this is not a cumulative graph, but this is actually the newly minted data sets every year by datasite in millions. If you look at data sets relative to the growth in articles overall, you also see that it's growing faster. So worldwide, you see the blue line is the blue line is overall article growth worldwide. So overall worldwide researchers growth is roughly 2 or 3% per year. Total article growth is roughly 5% per year. But the red line is the interesting one. That is the growth of publicly available data sets that are mentioned in articles, that are jointly published. And you see that that is growing a lot faster. However, the base is a lot smaller. The data sets are on the right, it's thousands, whereas articles are still in the millions. So there's order of magnitude difference. Most of the scientific communication still goes through articles, but there is a really fast growth in terms of articles. Let me zoom in to the Americas. If you look at all the countries in North and South America, you see that data sharing is happening there as well. So Mexico is in the top 5 countries in terms of data sharing. United States, Brazil, and Canada go first, but then there's Mexico. And then there's other countries like Chile, Argentina, Colombia, etc. You see that Mexico is up there with the top 5 countries in the Americas sharing data already today. You can also see that the growth in Mexico is growing faster than the growth of articles. So if you look at the past 5 years, you see the blue line is again the article growth. And the article or journal article output in Mexico is growing with 7% every year. Data sets associated with articles is growing a lot faster. It's growing by 22% each year, but again on a smaller base. The way we analyze this is we've looked at all the outputs from Mexico using our tool called SciVal. So if you're interested and if you have SciVal, you can actually check this analysis yourself. I'm sure these slides will be shared afterwards, and in the footnotes I've explained how this analysis was done. So you can actually replicate this analysis yourself. We're preaching our own gospel. Every data needs to be reproducible, and you can reproduce this graph yourself as well. This data is open for you. But why? Why is this happening? Why is data sharing happening? We all know the altruistic reasons why data sharing helps. I mean, obviously, when you share data, you help others to more quickly reproduce your results. And then also, you help others to build upon your data by reusing it. It's so much easier to start a new experiment if you have the raw data and settings and all the previous results from a previous experiment, instead of having to literally redo that analysis from scratch. And not only that, you actually save other people time if you share the data that went wrong, the failed results. So these are all altruistic reasons why data sharing helps. But of course, you know that there's also many, many reasons why researchers do not like to share data. Because when you share your data, you're sharing your gold. Somebody else may run away with your data and produce an article before you did it. Or somebody may look deeper in the data and question your results. So although there are good altruistic reasons to share data, there's many reasons not to share data. So why would researchers share data? Is it also in their own interest? And the answer is actually yes. There's some very good reasons why it helps researchers to share data. And the biggest reason, actually, it helps their career. Sharing data correlates with higher citation impact, and it correlates with more collaborations. That intuitively makes sense. If you share your data, people will use your article and your data maybe more frequently. And also, when you share your data, you actually attract others to collaborate with you more easily. Let's look at the numbers. I'm taking, for example, the United States. In the United States, we've analyzed all articles in the period of 2014 to 2019. We then looked at the impact. What was the impact of this research? And there's many ways you can measure impact, but in this case, we've taken two dimensions. On the horizontal axis, you see collaboration. So as I said, we want to measure what's the impact of data sharing in relation to international collaboration. And the other one is, what is the impact on being published in the top 10% citation percentiles? So how much does this impact citations? Now what you see is the big bubble in the middle is all the United States articles and proceedings, all the United States output. The interesting bubble is the little one in the top right. What you can see there is that actually when researchers have shared not only their article, but also a data set, actually the citations are a lot higher and the collaborations are a lot higher as well. So there's a correlation between higher citations and increased collaborations. This is in the United States. How would it be in Mexico? We've done the same analysis in Mexico. So in Mexico, again, we've measured the international collaborations for all Mexico articles and proceedings. And then we've looked at the top 10 citation percentiles. And to really make sure that we're not making any mistakes here, we've done both measurements field weighted. So we're correcting for any domain differences or field differences. And the same we did for those outputs in Mexico that are linked to datasets. And you see the same correlation as you see in the US. We've done this analysis for the US, for Europe, for Japan, for China. The correlation holds. So you see that sharing actually is not only good for others, but it's also good for you. I want to point out that we're not unique in making this claim. There's a nice article here that I want to point out to you, where they did a different analysis and they kind of looked at all the outputs from a variety of publishers across domains by PLOS and BMC, all part of the PubMed database, and they found the same correlation. So they found a correlation that when articles are linked to data, there is a 25% citation impact. That's a lot. So the question then is, what does that mean for your institution? Can you actually influence this behavior on an institutional level? Well, let's look a little bit more closely. If you look at Mexico, you can already see that actually all institutions are already sharing data today. And I've listed the larger institutions, but I can actually guarantee you that also the institutions that I've not mentioned here are also sharing data, but it's less than the ones that are mentioned here. Obviously, the bigger institutions probably share more data because they have more researchers, more research outputs, therefore more chance to share data. But what I find interesting here is that this data is shared across the world in over 2,000 repositories. So I wonder, do you actually know where your data is shared? So as an institution, there's 3 ways to look at your data. Let me start with the top bucket. First, you can think about your data that is shared publicly. Your data is shared on generalist or domain repositories, and this is good. This is what your researchers already do today. So genes can be shared on GenBank, proteins will be shared on PDB. In the social sciences, researchers use ICPSR. So there's many places where you can share data. There's generalist repositories like Mendeley Data or Figshare or Dryad. Researchers generally find their way to a place where they can share their data when there is a good place for them to go to. And what I mean with that, in their domain or their field, there might already be a place where they typically go to for that domain. And that is good. So a lot of your institutional outcomes actually will be published publicly on those subject or domain repositories. But does your institution have a data policy? Do you track where your data ends up, maybe using data management plans? And does that work? Or do you have another way to track where this data ends up? Do you know where your data sits? And conversely, your researchers probably know the big repositories in their domains, but how do they know the smaller repositories and the smaller outputs, or the results that were published on generalist repositories? Is there such a thing as a data search engine? So that's the top bucket. The second one is, again, public data, but it's data that can be shared on your institutional public data repository. Many institutions nowadays adopt an institutional data repository because they want to manage the intellectual property, they want to showcase their data, and they want to make sure that the researchers that actually share data have a natural place to go to. So does your institution have an institutional repository, a data repository? And do you know the benefits of a data-specific institutional repository? And do you show the world the data that your researchers have produced? And is that easily findable and searchable? Then last but not least, there's the data shared privately by or with your researchers. Now, in general, most institutions have a very good way to manage their own, what I would call on-premise data. So you have your own secure way to share your own research data. But nowadays, as you can already see in my prior slide, collaborations are so important. So how do researchers collaborate around their data with other institutions? Do you have a good visibility on that? Do you help your researchers manage that data? And maybe the most important question is, what happens at your institution if a researcher leaves? The data that's left behind, the data that's still at your institution, does somebody know how it was produced? Can it be reused? Or is it just sitting there and nobody understands anymore how it came about. So data management can actually help your institution. So it helps you to get credit, it helps your researchers to find the data, and it helps your data to make it more reusable. The first thing I may want to point out to you is the Rdmla. This is not an Elsevier thing that I'm promoting here, but it's actually something that came about by a variety of research institutions that take data management serious. And they've created an online academy where they teach institutions how to do data management. And maybe as one of the things to remember is, maybe if you want to know more about research data management, go to the Rdmla. It's a good resource to help you better understand research data management in depth. The good thing is you can take this course at your own time, at your own pace. And I think it's pretty helpful for, let's say, those librarians or research office people that care about data management at their institution. Now, I also want to think a little bit more about, we talked a little bit about the STIC and the funding bodies that mandate data sharing, which is a good thing actually, because I think it helps researchers to share more data. But we should think also a little bit more about how can we reward the world of research a little bit better by sharing research data. First, I'd like to point out that it is actually quite easy to share data. If you don't know where to share your subject or domain repository, go to one of the advised generalist repositories. And the list I'm picking out here is from the NIH. The NIH says, hey, there are good open data repositories out there. Use one of those. It works. Mendeley Data is the one from Elsevier. That's why I'm highlighting it, but I'm not discounting the others. They're also good data repositories. But let me talk a little bit more about Mendeley Data, because one of the questions I asked earlier was, how do you find research data? There's so much out there. What we've done on Mendeley Data is actually not just index Mendeley Data itself, but we index over 2,000 repositories and all that data. So if you search for COVID-19 or Corona or SARS-CoV-2 or any other combination, you will actually find results from over those 2,000 repositories. And you may not just only find results that are immediately logical, but also some results that you may not have thought about. So for any researcher, we provide this data search engine because we think it's important the data is not only shared, but also found, findable data. An example is, for example, this one. The reason why I pointed out is many institutions care about open science, and as Elsevier, we also wanted to give an example of what you can do with open science. So what we've done is we have a product called Pathway Studio that connects proteins and molecules and diseases. So diseases can be MERS or SARS, proteins, which can maybe cure those diseases, and molecules, how they interact. This is a very deep and very, well, actually over time, carefully built database. And what we've done is we've extracted the relationships specifically for COVID-19 and created an open data set that we have published on Mendeley Data. And I posted the link here. It's an example of where we've collected the information from all over the world in this open ecosystem, analyzed it, enriched it, and the result is now republished on one of those repositories, in this case, Mendeley Data. And it's an example of how you can use multiple data sets and articles and content and enrich it and then create new research. Many researchers are finding their way to Mendeley Data. Why? Well, for example, it's easy. We didn't have to worry about anything. It just worked with the very large files that we had. And then Professor John Ioannidis actually says the number of emails that they received about these data sets is astronomical. This points again to this notion that publishing your data helps to attract more collaborations. Then Professor Feltz actually says, hey, I could publish a data set that otherwise I could not publish because all my data comes from different locations and it's not attached to any major journal article or a large university. So I wanted to actually something completely separate. Okay, and that works. So what I wanted to point out is that we actually care about making sure that this ecosystem starts to work. And that's why we're providing the Mendeley data partially as a free service. And any researcher that can come to Mendeley can share their data or find data for free. It's an open service that we think matters to power this ecosystem. Now, for institutions, we actually provide something more, and that is a paid-for service. So I'm sorry, we are a commercial company, so we do charge money for our additional services. But maybe you understand when I say what we do, you understand why we charge. It's a lot of work. As an institution, 90% of your research data that is publicly available will be hosted on external subject or domain repositories. And only a small fraction will be hosted on your institutional data repository. So even if you have an institutional data repository, which is a good thing, there's a lot of data that you still may not know where it is. We can help with that. So what we do is we track all the data on any repository worldwide that is yours. We enrich it and we make sure that this is tracked back to you. So if you want to report, showcase, and actually give credit to the researchers that have done this sharing, you need to know what they've done. And that's where we can help. And then secondly, obviously we provide a basic free Mendeley data repository, but we also provide a more enhanced, enriched repository and manager function, where we also help you manage your private data so that when researchers leave, the data can still be reused. Why is this helpful? Well, you can showcase your data and attract more collaborations. It improves your visibility. We can also help you to understand where you stand relative to other institutions. So we can help you discover where your data is shared, but you can also look at other institutions and look at where they are sharing their data and what data they are sharing. So we are one of the only, actually, we are the only product where you can make these comparisons between universities and where you can compare what your researchers are doing and what other institutions are doing. This is actually where I'd like to end, because I think now you understand better why we as publishers care about open science and why we care about data sharing. If you think about if you think about the traditional model of publishing articles, it's a linear model where the researchers collects data, the author collects the results, then as a publisher, you publish the article, and as a reader, you read it. But it's a linear model. The reader can't really engage with the data. What we're promoting now is a world where data, tools, users, and articles are one ecosystem, and you can connect them manually, maybe by reading that, but you can also put machines to work to extract new research from this, like, for example, the Pathway Studio example that I used. The big difference here is that in the first model, basically, it's a reputation game. We help researchers build reputation, which is a good thing. But the second one is even more interesting, because in this network model, it's a trust model. You need to trust who to share your data with. You need to be control who you share your data with. But when you do, you actually attract more collaborations and you attract more impact. And actually, this allows you as a researcher or as an institution to grow more, control more, and actually have more impact. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have some questions for me, and I hope I was intelligible enough. Thank you again. I see Carlos appearing again.
Thank you very much, Wouter, for your presentation. Was really clear. Let me ask you a few questions. Do you have an idea of what type of data associated with articles of course is most frequently shared?
Yes, actually, I do know that. So typically, what we see as items that are shared a lot is, for example, chemical data. So in the chemical world, crystals and crystal structures are shared a lot. But to be honest, we see sharing happening in any domain. So we see it in the health domain, we see it in the bio and life sciences, we see it in the social sciences. Basically, in all domains, we see data sharing happening. So I don't think there is a single domain where I've seen no data sharing. Even in the humanities, where you think, why would you share data in humanities? It's happening. So for example, the digital humanities is an area that is growing very fast, and there's lots and lots of data sharing happening there as well. So I do not know a single research domain where data sharing no longer matters.
Thanks for that. And do you know what is the typical infrastructure needed to manage research data for a university? And if so, could you tell us something about it?
So yeah, that's a really good question. So that goes back to the picture that I had with those 3 buckets of data. There's private data, there's maybe the institutional repository, and then there's the public data shared elsewhere. Typically, what I see is that universities are generally well set up for their private data. So, and I'm not talking about the management of that, but I mean, there is usually good facilities for researchers to store private data, do computations, do analysis. So within the institution, I don't think we as Elsevier have a lot to add in terms of that infrastructure. However, if you ask the question, well, do you have infrastructure to that then helps researchers to collaborate and annotate that private data? And that's where you may think, do I have something in place? And then there's always the choice, do I build something myself or do I buy it off the shelf? Both are possible. If you build it yourself, you need to maintain it and continuously upgrade it. Obviously, if you buy it, it's an expense, and then but you then don't need to worry about it. You can also choose to not manage the private data. In that case, you leave it up to the researchers completely to leave their data behind at all, or share their data with other researchers if they can. To be frank, you see that at many groups and universities, because the most common model is that people say, well, yes, I have my data, and yes, it's on the university drive. But then when people say, well, is it described? Can somebody make sense of it who's not you? Then the answer is usually, So then we go to the next level, the institutional repository, and particularly the institutional data repository level. Again, this is super helpful. It's actually quite simple. Either you build it or you buy it, but it's a very easy way to kind of give your researchers a structured way to share your institutional data and make it public. The easiest way to start managing your data is actually the first bucket. Actually, I should maybe flip back to that screen just to complete that answer. The easiest bucket is maybe the top bucket. It is data shared on generalist or domain repositories. The nice thing about that is that your researchers are already sharing data in a good way. It's already shared on subject or domain repositories or generalist repositories. The only thing you need to do is to track this. And then you can showcase this, you can reward your researchers for doing so, and you can more easily report to the funding bodies. This is something where we can help you with. So again, Mendeley Data, in this case, Mendeley Data Monitor, helps you to track and report on this. It's maybe a long answer to a short question, but I hope this answers your question.
Thank you, Wouter. No, it's a very complete answer. Thank you very much. It seems that in Mexico, researchers are very jealous of information and do not share their work. What do you recommend to that institutions to demonstrate to researchers that the information will be well managed?
Yeah, so this is the same all over the world. And it's actually not a problem. The thing to take care of is we think it's very important that the researchers should be in control. So researchers generally, of course, they feel very jealous of their data. They need to kind of make sure that they stay in control and that they only share it with the people that they trust or know that they can get the benefit from. Actually, what I believe and what I've seen is that if you as a university set up an infrastructure which allows your researchers to do this in a structured way and in a controlled way, then it actually happens. If you just let it to the researchers, then indeed nothing will happen. And if you're lucky, some data will be shared because the journal required it or the funding body required it, but it doesn't happen just like that. So as an institution, it's not enough to just tell your researchers that it's a good idea. It's also really important that you provide a very much secure and controlled way that they are in control and that you can help them rather than that they feel, hey, my data can be scooped. So this is a very important point. Yes, you can't just provide any infrastructure because if it's not trusted, then it will not work. Thank you.
Thank you. Wouter, are you aware of some or any national assessment research system that now is including data as part of the assessment for researchers?
Well, it's a good question. A national assessment. Well, what I'm going to point out is that there's some very big funding bodies that, as part of their assessment, take research data into account. So, for example, in Europe, the Horizon 2020 program and now the new Horizon program actually checks if you have shared your data. And then in order to get a new grant, they actually check whether you indeed shared your data in the previous round. So indeed they check. The same goes for Wellcome Trust. And then I would say in the US, NIH is also starting to move in this direction, where it becomes part of the evaluation to look whether you shared your data. In terms of national assessments, I've seen that particularly Australia, UK, and Netherlands are a couple of examples that I know that take data sharing into account as an important piece of the whole rounded picture of new funding grants. I don't know if this answer is complete because I know this is happening in so many countries, but I don't know how rigid the assessment is really on this dimension.
Thanks. That gives us an idea of the landscape on this. And how do you see the future of data management to get funds, to get funded?
So that's
that relation.
So I don't think that in the next 2 or 3 years that we will be in a situation where funding bodies will say you will no longer get funded if you do not share your data. I don't think that is a short-term kind of development. What I do believe is that this notion where data sharing helps and gives you more citations and more impact indirectly will lead to getting easier funding. Because what you see is that the funding bodies are more and more looking at international collaborations. Who do you work with? How important is that consortium? As well as how impactful was your research? Now, these are the basic criteria for any funding round. So then having shared your data before and then having led to more citations and collaborations, I think helps to get more funding.
And there's now we have DOIs for every digital object, and of course we can have DOIs for data.
Yeah.
Have you seen some increasing or a kind of behavior of people citing directly to the data, not to the paper that is associated with?
Yeah, great question. So what do you cite? Do you cite the paper or do you cite the data set? So I think there's two answers to this. Yes, I have seen an increase in citations directly to the data. So that is increasing a lot. However, common practice is that you typically cite the paper and not the data set. So direct citations to data set is still a fraction of total citations. Even if you look at that 25 or even 30% increase of citations to articles that have data sets, generally are citations to the article and not to the data set.
There are a couple of journals, of scientific journals for data sets specifically. Do you feel that with these kind of technologies, repositories, DOIs, they're going to be more of these kind of journals, or completely the opposite behavior, decreasing the number of these kind of journals?
So very good question. So there are so-called data journals where people write an article about a data set or write a description of the data set, and then this micro article or mini article is then published in this data journal, and the data may be published on a repository. Now, the big difference between, let's say, a data set on just a repository and a data set on a data journal is that it was peer reviewed. So if a data set is associated with a peer reviewed journal, that means that specifically in the data journal, the reviewers and the editors look at the data itself. So for me, I think it's actually a very good development that happens in parallel. More data sets get shared. However, if you then also have a data article or data journal, that means that the data was also peer reviewed. That's a good thing. It's a mark of quality. I think actually what you see now is that both are increasing, and that's a good thing.
And I think that finally, Wouter, and saying thanks to you again, could you, if you can share for our students and postgraduate students and undergraduate ones, and also young researchers, a best practice on data management, what will be your advice?
That's a good question, and I have a very good answer. So I hope. We actually have every month we look at the data sets that are published on Mendeley Data every month, And we ask our advisory board every month, what do you think was the data set that was the most fair, the most findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable? And every month we then handpick the best or the fairest data set of that month. So we have a series of fair data sets that we highlight, and we interview the author and we ask them, why did you share the data and why did you do this so well? So I think we actually already now have 4 examples of excellent data sets that are examples of how you can share data in a great way, including the interviews with the researchers, why and how they did that. So maybe we can share after the conference links to these data sets as examples.
Thank you. That would be lovely.
Yeah.
So Wouter, thanks again. Nice afternoon. And here's another question.
Oh, okay.
Waiting in the chat, the next question. I don't see it.
Okay. In the meantime,
yes,
I can maybe look up the best data set in the month.
Oh, please. That would be nice to see it.
So let me stop sharing. And then we wait for the question, because I think if you look for the fairest data set of the month, you will find it. No, sorry, can't do it right now.
Apart from downloading or downloads of data, that is the obvious metric. Do you know another effort of the creation for more metrics on data?
Metrics on data. So that's a good question. So citations are a difficult metric on data, because citations are, as I said, typically in most cases going to the article. What we do measure is dataset views and dataset downloads, which are an indicator of interest. So we do report on the views and downloads for each dataset, and we also report for institutions for views and downloads. So it's not the same as quality. It's also not the same as a citation, but it's a good indicator for interest. So it's a proxy for popularity, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, and I see another question. So each institution should have their own research data management policy with a question mark. Well, actually, yes. So institutions should have their own data management policy. That does not need to be unique. They can just copy paste a good policy from another institution. So, for example, I know that many Australian institutions have excellent data management policies, because ANDS was one of the first data bodies to think about what are good data policies. Also, the Digital Curation Center, DCC in Edinburgh, is quite good at helping institutions shape their data policy. But it's good to think through for your institution what matters for you. And what is really important is that your data policy needs to be in alignment with the tools that you provide to your researchers and the support that you provide to your researchers. So, for example, you can have a very stringent data sharing policy, but if you don't support them, it's not going to work. So my best advice is, for example, again, go to Rdmla, the Research Data Management Library Academy. It also talks about data management plans and data sharing policies, and it will help you to, I think, get started on this topic.
There's another question here. What do you think are the benefits for sharing data?
Well, I think that goes back to the earlier part of my presentation. I think the benefits are a lot for others. So it helps others to get started more quickly on their research. It helps others to save time. It helps others to actually get deeper insights, and it helps maybe adjacent research. So there's a lot in data sharing that helps others. The good news is that it also helps you. If you share data, it helps in terms of impact because you will get more citations, and it will help in terms of collaborations. So you will attract more international collaborations.
Do you think that there's gonna be a kind of a specialization on a professional level to have these specific positions at certain levels at the university, like I don't know, data managers or something like that?
That's actually already happening. So you see that some universities are creating special data librarians that help researchers with finding, sharing, storing, and enriching their data. And certain faculties or departments are also instating data stewards that help to make sure that when researchers create data, it's also there for the next generation, so that the data grows in a way that is helpful for each new generation of researchers that come and go from the university. So absolutely, you see actually that there's a lot of vacancies at the moment for data stewards, data champions, and data librarians.
That's nice. And you see some impact of open data on entrepreneurship?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think what is interesting is you can think about data is not only research data, but there's also government data or public data that is shared more and more. And you see companies actually are start using that data to create advice tools or tools for. So yes, I mean, there are actually many examples of small and larger companies that reuse that data for commercial purposes.
Okay, there's a question here. Since research data management also helps with the preservation, do you recommend to have in-house developments?
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting is this goes back to how do you approach this as a university? Do you develop your own systems or do you purchase something off the shelf? The reason why we as Elsevier are in this business is that we believe that it's better for institutions to purchase a solution here because it's easier. Actually, it's cheaper because it's cheaper to buy something than having to pay a lot of people to maintain this system in over time. We've actually seen many universities first implement their own solution and then later on switch to a solution from Elsevier or from another vendor. But there are many reasons why universities choose to develop this themselves, and develop this themselves is a big word. Usually you would use an open source solution, and there's good open source solutions out there that you can implement. It just requires a lot of attention and a lot of people to maintain it after it has been implemented in the first instance.
Okay.
So,
Wouter, now we are waiting for 5G in technology for mobiles, and it's going to be the increasing of data. So we're talking about the real data deluge and the real problem, the real issue here, because now with Internet of Things, data are going to be the next commodities or the actual commodities in this society, and the storaging and the metadata and indexing of this data are going to be most of the problems and the troubles we're going to have as society in the next years. For the next generation, I think it's going to be one of the biggest problems. How do you see these this challenge that is coming with this data knowledge that we're going to have?
So great question. There is so much data coming our way. What do we do? And actually, it ties in nicely to a question that I see coming up as well, because how do Elsevier ensure that the data remains on the institutional side? I think actually both questions are related. What you see with this data is that the data lands in this blue bucket on this slide. It lands to the private data, and the data is exploding there. As an institution, you would like to be in control of that data. We as Elsevier have no interest to take that data and make it our own. We actually believe that you as an institution, you should keep that data. And we do not want to, I mean, we can host this if you would want so, but hosting and storing data is actually a commodity, and that's something you can buy anywhere. What we think is what you should have is a method to track what the data is and how valuable that data is. That is where we come in. So we help you to track which data is attached to which project. And then we help you to track how impactful was that project. If nobody uses that data for 5 years, or if the project is not really impactful at all, there's an easier decision for you to then delete the data. We as Elsevier, it's not our data. We do not want to own that data. It's your data. And you as an institution stay in control. But we help you to actually make those decisions rather than having just a black box full of data that increases gigantically without you knowing what is valuable and what not.
It's all about tagging.
Yes, exactly. We do the tagging and you make the decisions.
So I think it was really interesting the session. I am completely sure there is a new topic for most people that is listening us now, and it's time to encourage everybody to think in data management, not just on the generation, but on the preservation and all the things that we need to make with data after we generate it. That is a painful process, as all researchers know, very, very, very expensive in time and other kind of resources, and lose them just by no or incomplete or a bad management of them should be very sadly. Thanks, Wouter, again for your presentation, for sharing with us your knowledge, and I hope this is going to be very enlightening for the people in Mexico and all Latin America. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.